Hey there, guys. So I know this is maybe a little bit late, but that's okay. I'm going to give you a little bit of guidance on how the revolutionary area of American history is working at this time. I did give you some videos to watch last week to kind of give you some of that background information, but it looks like we're going to need a little bit more to guide us, which is no big deal. So that's why I'm kind of getting this up. I was hoping to get this up a little bit earlier, potentially Thursday or Friday, but unfortunately I wasn't able to, but better late than never, right? So, again, we have moved on to the Revolutionary Era. So kind of remember we are looking through American literature, but we're doing it very quickly. And again, the reason we're doing this is because technically this class is supposed to focus on world literature, but you always compare global literature to your own native literature. So I think it's really important that you guys understand what American literature is and how it's affected by other time periods, how it got to where it is today, and how other pieces of literature kind of compare to American literature once we start looking at other places and peoples. So again, we moved on from the Puritan era or the colonial literature era, and we're looking more into the American Revolutionary era, which again, remember, we are not America yet. We are still British citizens. We are still under the rule of King George III. We are still really, really disgruntled or not happy colonists. So when we start looking at this, if you watch the videos from last week, you're going to start to notice that there's essentially three sides to this argument, per se. The first is obviously going to be the British, so obviously they are going to have the most to say about this. Mainland British people, so I'm talking about like British subjects in Britain. Remember, the British and the English are the same. British is a little bit more encompassing because it encompasses a couple of other places, but if I say British, I mean everybody. If I'm specifically talking about Englanders or Londoners, I'll specifically say that. But right now, we'll just go with the British. On the other hand, there are the colonists, and the colonists actually separate into two primary groups. The first is going to be out of those two groups, the first is going to be the loyalists. So keyword, they're loyal. They want to remain loyal to the British Crown, and they want to reconcile, which is a word you probably had to look up in your text this week. They wanted to get back together with Britain. They wanted to make everything right and everybody just go back to the way things were. On the other hand, they had a little bit more of an extreme group known as the Patriots. The Patriots were more interested in being taken seriously by the British Crown, and what that meant for them is looking for independence or freedom, whatever term you want to use. They could also use liberty there, whatever term you want to use, but they weren't feeling taken seriously by the British government, so they essentially said, well, if you're not going to treat us the way we see that we should be, we're going to separate. And this was a big issue between the colonists because it was about half and half, the loyalists and the patriots. There's a lot of people who wanted to stay, and there's a lot of people who wanted to go. But within that, we kind of see our text, give me liberty or give me death, which you should have been looking at this week. And that speech, again, was given by a guy named Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry was kind of a young gun in this particular meeting. So think about it. You're going into, okay, let's say as sophomores, okay? So you guys are sophomores for the most part. Let's say you guys walk into a room full of college seniors. So they're in their last year of their college degree, and you walk in there, and all of a sudden you have a different opinion than everybody else in the room. That can be a little bit intimidating. You still want to get your point across. You still want to share your point for whatever you guys are discussing in this particular scenario. But it's going to be a little intimidating because you're around a lot of people who maybe have more experiences with speaking than you do, or people who are listened to a little bit more because they have more experience with, education, or more experience with public speaking, or more experience just in a way that gets them a better reputation in this particular scenario. But Patrick Henry doesn't really have any of this. Patrick Henry is kind of like the sophomore walking into a bunch of college seniors and trying to say, I'm right. That's kind of a hard position to take. So if you start looking at this text in that way, and you look at the notes that Third Black has kind of already started to put for their little packet that I have posted for you guys, when we look at this text, you're going to start to see that in paragraph 1, that paragraph 1 is kind of building a sense of credibility for Patrick Henry. Several points in the first paragraph, he uses ethos, which again is like that ethical or moral stance in a particular situation. So he's kind of saying, hey guys, you're making really valid points, you're making great arguments, but I have something to say too, and I think it's really important that I share what I see as well. That way everybody has shared their opinions and we can go from that point. And obviously Patrick Henry made a big impression with this fairly short speech on this group full of much older, much more mature, much more experienced people. Because obviously we still look at it today, we still see it, and I'm sure some of you have even heard the phrase, give me liberty or give me death before this moment when we're reading it in class. It's a super famous line by him, and the speech has alternate names, but it's primarily known for that last line that he gives, give me liberty or give me death. So he has a lot of really intense language in this speech. He uses a lot of reasoning. Again, guys, I only want you to complete the little chart for one of the paragraphs between paragraphs 2 and 4. I'm going to post additional information for paragraph 1 as some of your in-person classmates continue to post that. And I am also going to do paragraph 5 as well with your in-person classmates. So those will be made available to you as well as we kind of finish those up in class. So hopefully the end of Tuesday, at the earliest, but at the latest, maybe some of it might get up on Wednesday as well. I am going to give you guys a little bit more time to work on that. It does seem like quite a few of you are still struggling to get through what I've assigned for this week. Keep in mind, guys, that I don't mind if you need extra time, and I don't mind if you have questions, but it might be better to ask them before Friday when things are due. Remember, I am going to make all due dates on Friday unless there's a specific situation otherwise. And I typically don't post a brand new assignment on Friday, so you'll at least have 2 days to work on any given assignment before it's due. Typically more than that. And you guys have had access to a lot of the information before the text. You had access to that information for a couple of days. So kind of keep that in mind. I don't mind giving the extra time if you're constantly working, if you're asking those questions. I know some of you did contact me, but again, it was on Friday. And I tried to get back to everybody that I saw had, asked any questions. It seemed like some people forgot our whole annotation process, which I'm going to go over here in a second. But I just wanted to make a couple more comments about the period we're looking at. So remember in this period that if this is kind of what's going on, if we're gearing up for war, or if we're already at war, whatever the case may be, if this is kind of the situation, a lot of the literature is going to focus on that conflict. So I'm not saying all literature is focused on that conflict from that period, but a large majority of it is. And we're going to look at 2 other texts during this unit for this period, and I'm gonna let you guys have a choice over reading one or the other. You're not gonna have to read both, but the idea is pretty much the same in both. If you've read one, essentially you've read them both. So that more information on that a little bit later, but the choices are going to be between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Neither one is super long. The language is still a little bit difficult. It is still that legal language, or that legal jargon is what it would be called. Jargon is just specific terminology for a particular area of study. So, for example, you would use terms like simile, metaphor, tone when you're talking about English, but when you're talking about anatomy, you're going to be talking about appendix. You're going to be talking about different muscle groups. You're going to be talking about different veins like the jugular or the aorta. Aorta? Is that right? I don't know. I don't teach anatomy, and there's a reason for that, because I don't know. But point being, legal jargon. So a lot of these documents that we're going to see from this period, or a lot of literature from this period, is going to be in the form of legal documentation. Which leads me to one other thing I would like to mention about American literature as a whole. When you look at American literature, you're going to bounce back and forth from one extreme to the other and back to the one previous. So if you think about the unit or the section of this unit that we looked at previously, so colonial literature, it's very much about the individual. They're always focused on themselves, seeing what's going to happen to themselves in the future based on their religious beliefs and whatnot, but it's always self-centered and self-focused. It's also very religious-based. On the other hand, if you swing over to this side, when you look at American revolutionary literature, you're going to see very formal documentation, whereas we saw speech and poetry before. You're going to see stuff that's focused on government practices rather than, you know, religious beliefs and like societal expectations. You're going to see stuff that's a little bit lengthier rather than the poetry by Anne Bradstreet or the sermon by Jonathan Edwards. You're going to see things that are a little bit lengthy. And of course, I'm sure you're noticing that the language got a whole lot tougher all of a sudden. And that's not me torturing you. That's just me making sure that you guys can handle anything that life throws at you. I want you to have some tools to approach a text that seems difficult. And that process is that annotation stuff I've been asking you to do since last week. So there's a reason I asked you to check out those annotation strategies, to watch the videos I had posted. It's because I really do hope that you guys are following that step-by-step process. It will help you a lot. So step one, guys, is always going to be to look for vocabulary you're not sure about. But also think about reactions you're having to the text. Does something seem confusing? Does something kind of shock you? Do they use really, really emotionally charged language? Something that kind of made you sit back and go, wow, like that's really intense. Like we maybe saw with the Jonathan Edwards speech. So what are your reactions to that piece of the text or parts, or the whole text is one entity? But also any ideas, main ideas, details that seem important, any of that kind of stuff that just seems super duper important. And that's going to be like your first time reading through. But guys, it's not just enough to say I don't know a word. Your responsibility is then to go look up that word. And I do suggest that you use a thesaurus and replace it. That way when you read the sentence again, you can actually replace the words you don't know. And theoretically, you know all the words in that sentence. Now you just have to understand the meaning of the sentence. But you've replaced all the words you don't know that are difficult. So you should have a much easier time reading that paragraph. So that always needs to be step one. Because I know a lot of you were like, oh, I forgot to do that. Well, that's step one for a reason, guys. It does help break down some of that stuff for you. And this is a little bit longer of a text than we've looked at so far. And this is definitely something a little bit more complex than we've looked at before. So I started you off with something fairly straightforward. And now we're moving into those more difficult things. Step two needs to be kind of thinking about what this text is about. So start developing some of those ideas. Maybe create a little summary for yourself, maybe like a little 10-word summary. The only reason I say 10 words, guys, is because you don't need to spend a whole lot of time summarizing a text when the whole point is for us to get past summarizing into analyzing. So definitely do some short little itty-bitty bit for yourself so you're like, oh, okay, I remember what this text is about. But if you're doing the activity I asked you in the handout that's a Google form, there's actually a section above each of the paragraphs where it's going to give you a spot to give yourself a little snippet about what the text or that paragraph or that section of the paragraph was about. Again, I am going to be adding some more information to the paragraph 1 section as well as the paragraph 5 section. I think I'm going to give you guys Tuesday to finish that up, and then Wednesday through Friday we'll be looking at some an additional text. One that will be a little bit more accessible to you, a little bit easier for you to kind of chew on. Remember, so step 1, find that vocabulary. Remember to also look up that vocabulary you're not sure about. Reactions, main ideas, and details. Step 2, create a little summary for yourself, something that you can bounce off, ideas like, okay, I gotta remember this is what the text is about. Step 3 is to look at those W's, okay? And if you did step 2, that's kind of like your what statement already. That's already answering your W what. But of course you still have those other ones. You still have who, which remember is a 2-part question. Who is the author and who is the audience of this text? Remember, audiences and speakers are 2 different things. But right now, since everything we've read has been essentially a primary document, we'll talk about speakers and audiences once we start to get into things that are a little bit more fiction-based. But so we have who, when, where, which again, those videos that I posted last week are going to be the spot to check out for that when, where stuff. So those John Green videos that I posted, guys, that is where you're going to get your when, where information. What is going on in history at this time that this document needed to be created, that this speech needed to be delivered to this group of guys at this time. And of course, we know it's a group of guys because at this time women weren't in government. But of course, we know that because of the time period. So we know the whole audience is men. Plus, there's several references in the text that say, these worthy gentlemen, not gentlewomen, not, men and women, not humans, gentlemen. So you can use little pieces of the text to tell you that, but you can also use the information I provided in those videos to help you kind of make a little bulleted list of, situations or important information about that time period. We also have why, so what is the goal of this text? What is Patrick Henry's goal? In this text, I think that all hinges on if you determine that Patrick Henry is a patriot or a loyalist. And I think it's really important you to think of that one through. So for example, Patrick Henry, if he is classified as a loyalist, that means he wants to get back with Britain. And based on the text, you'll have to determine if that lines up with his argument or not. He could also be classified as a patriot. If he's classified as a patriot, do you feel like that is more his speed? Do you feel like that is what the text is arguing or showing his position to be? Somebody who wants to separate from Britain. So of course that goal is directly linked to who Patrick Henry is and the situations that are going on at this time in history. So that when, where, and that why are going to go so nicely together. And of course that's also going to help you answer that audience question as well. Because remember, authors don't write text to people who already agree with them. The whole idea of this speech is to change minds, to persuade in some way. Who is he trying to persuade? And that all depends on if Patrick Henry, if you identify him as a loyalist or a patriot. So think that one through, take some time, think about who you need to persuade. And of course, who is Patrick Henry? So who would he need to persuade with this speech? And then finally, we have how. Whew, couldn't think of that one. I was having a moment, guys. So how, this is going to be a really easy one for this text for you. You should have answered the 3 I just mentioned on that first page in the document. The second page is kind of done for you in a additional document posted that looks just like the copy for you. And then the how is the rest of the rest of the activity. So I already have those pieces pulled out for you. Some of those devices or techniques that Patrick Henry is using in his speech. I've already pulled out the examples. I just want you to tell me, what do you think it's doing? So explain what's going on in that particular little snippet. So if Patrick Henry is, kissing up to the guys that he's speaking to, that's fine. Tell me he's kissing up to them, but what is the purpose of that device? What is that device doing? If it's a simile, what is the simile doing? If it's making a comparison using like or as, What comparison is it making? How is that adding to the text? So don't just tell me why, but tell me what the device is doing. How is it adding to the text? And this is a little bit more difficult. That's why we're doing a couple of different examples, and I only asked you to do one section because it is a little bit more than I would normally ask you for one particular text. That's why I'm giving you extra time. That's why I'm completely available when you guys have questions. Even over the weekend, I know some of you have probably noticed that I'll email you back over the weekend. Especially with issues with pre-testing and questions about this particular activity. I'm, available, and I've been happy to answer questions as they have come to my email. And remember, my email is mejenkins, so if you're emailing anybody else, that's not me and I can't help you. That should be it for the activity, guys. Again, you should just have to do one of those sections. So either 2, 3, or 3.5 or 4. So one of those 4 charts, 1 and 5 are going to be done for you in a separate document. And you should have to do the chart on page 1. I did post a video so you guys could listen to the text as many times as you need to. Let me know, guys. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I've only gotten a handful of questions, and most people hadn't even done the vocabulary step, which again is really, really important for you guys. Don't feel bad about not knowing a word. In class, we had almost 30 words per class period that we had to look up. Some classes had more, which is absolutely fine. If you don't know a word, you don't know it. It's only wrong if you don't look it up, if you don't try to find that information. So please stay in contact with me. Let me know if there's anything else I can do. I'm happy to help. I'm here. I'm available. Again, I think I'm going to give you guys Tuesday to finish this up, and then I will be posting our next text. I'm also considering giving us one more poem for this section because there's one other perspective we haven't quite looked at, but I want to see how the rest of this week goes first to make that final determination, because we also haven't talked about the slave perspective in this particular sense, because remember, slavery is in existence at this time, and it's a popular revenue source for a lot of colonists. So it's important that we make that connection. It's important that we talk about that perspective as well, and what things might be going on and how that might be affecting other issues. So if we look at another text for this section, it will be the very beginning of next week. So this week it's kind of looking like Tuesday we're going to be finishing up with the Patrick Henry text. Wednesday and Thursday, potentially also Friday, we'll be looking at either the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. Again, I will give you guys the choice for one or the other, and you'll have a little activity to do with that. In person, we're going to be doing a debate, but I need to see kind of what I'm going to do as an alternate for that for you guys, since I can't really require you to work with somebody else. You're welcome to do so for these activities, guys, but it's not required, of course. But I'll keep you up to date and in a loop with that. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm always available. Have a great rest of your week, guys.